Good morning. I hope you all are doing so well. Thank you so much for being here. So I've been at a bit of a hiatus, I suppose, exploring some things, which is always curious to me because I never realize that's what's happening until I pop up out of it. And so this is the cycle, right? This kind of forgetting where I am and what I'm doing. I think this is so common for all of us. We are energetic beings, and yet we're in a human body. And how do we simultaneously remember and experience both? Most times it's impossible, right? We're more focused on one or the other. So there's this theory, or I think there is this attempt that we go through to try and understand what we're doing here, why we're suffering here. And we often have said in the past, or we hear these ideas that we come into this world in order to heal it. We're here to figure out where the trauma is, why this is happening, and to alchemize it or to turn it on its head, let's say. And I've been seeing things a little bit differently lately. And this is the tendency, right? As we uncover more and more layers of this, we come into deeper and deeper understandings. And that's what we would call part of the human experience, right? Is that we are continually evolving and growing. What we believed yesterday may not stand today, and that's perfectly okay. And it's perfectly within our rights to constantly change our minds. In fact, it's a sign of growth that we are able to do this. That we don't stay rooted into a belief system that we held perhaps, eons ago that may have served us at the time. But we are always integrating, always moving forward. So one of the things I used to tell myself to try and make sense of my experience is that, well, I was born into a family where there was lots of dysfunction because it was maybe my job to figure out what was going on there, or this was part of the mission, right? This is what we hear. That may be true, it may be not. I don't know. What I am discovering, I've been doing a lot of, I don't know if I'd call it research, right? But trying to gain as much information as I can about the nervous system and how this affects our bodies. And what I'm finding is that, at least this is my theory, right? We're all born into this world with a certain level of clarity and consciousness and source light, or let's say availability, bioavailability is what I like to call it, of source light, right? Our ability to tap into that inner knowing and consciousness within ourselves. But what I'm finding is that, well, I always see the energy field as a planetary body, right? It's a sphere, it's a mass or configuration of energy. And we are each this light body sphere. We're born into this planet, which is the same. It has its own consciousness, its own structure. As a human, we enter this world through a human body, though, through our mother's bodies. And that, in and of itself, is also a planetary body, an atmosphere, right? Which we live in for several months. And what happens is that this planetary body has its own consciousness, has its own experience, has its own light, but also has its own trauma, right? Just as the earth does as well. This human that we connect with, that we emerge through, has its own life and its own experiences. And we know that the body stores trauma. And the message of that trauma, the way that trauma is understood, is encoded into the nervous system. So we have our own nervous system, and our mothers have their nervous systems. And yet what we find is that nervous systems tend to attune and acclimate to one another, so that when we are in the womb, we are already receiving these messages of how this being, this atmosphere, is interpreting its world, how it interacts with its world, how it connects with its world, and how it feels about its world. So if our mothers were in fear or they were depressed, we are already picking up and attuning to that. We take that in. We take that on, actually, as part of who we are. We can't help it. This is how energy works, right? When it interacts with each other, when these fields come into contact with each other, we naturally start to attune to that. And so once we're born into this world, right, we're met with so many more energy bodies. And this is really, when we're little, this is our world. Our world is our family that we are born into. And I've always said, the family systems here are highly dysfunctional. They are trauma-based. And they absolutely are. Because all of our nervous systems now, right, are communicating with one another. And they're all distorted. They're all dysregulated. So how I am choosing to understand it at this point, right, is that, well, yes, we came in clear, but we already started to attune to what was here. And of course, then we can have many, many experiences which can further traumatize us. And hopefully along the way, we have some clarity. We have someone or something that comes in to show us some light or to remind us who we are. Whether it's through other family members who may be more removed from that immediate trauma field, that web of dysregulation. Perhaps it comes through religion or church. Sometimes that's our only outlet outside of our own family dynamics. So, in whatever way that it comes to us, along the way, there's a little bit of light. But more often than not, what happens is we start to feel that something is wrong with us. So in looking back now, it becomes very clear that the work actually is to understand that family of origin, the trauma that occurred there, and how that shaped and affected us and molded us into who we are today. What's been shown to me several times now in the past week is that what we might call the veils, right? People will say, well, there's veils in this world. There are veils in this world. And this is why we can't remember who we are. I would actually argue that the trauma and the dysfunction that is perpetuated here through our human biology, through our nervous systems, is actually the veil. The veil is the trauma, right? This dysregulation that we hold in our bodies, in our minds, in our systems. And that is what is causing us to be unable to connect to the truth of who we really are. And this is why, too, the stillness, the meditation, finding things to give ourselves space from that dysregulation and from the trauma is so important. And yet it can be really hard to find that if we're still really confused about why we're feeling so confused, right? So it's a bit of a circle loop until we kind of see this more clearly for ourselves. But this is the goal, right, of this work, is to say, well, we all experience this to one degree or another. Some of us more than others, right? Which is what makes it challenging, because if your experience continues to be one of trauma, we certainly start to identify as there being something wrong with us, when in fact, we all come in right. It's what we are exposed to in this material reality, and how we start to believe that we are our surroundings and we are the atmosphere that we are born into, and we become the atmosphere into which we emerge through. And this is just not true, right? So the work is really to see that, right? And I think part of the problem with spirituality and kind of transcendental work is that there's this seeking, trying to get back to oneself, trying to find oneself, or trying to evolve into a higher being. And yet we already are connected. We already are that. What is keeping us from feeling and experiencing that is that we have meshed ourselves with that trauma, right? So the behaviors and the patterns that we were shown growing up, we take that on. We don't even know it because we don't know the difference, right? This is part of the issue, is that all of this feels normal to us, until we find something or bump into someone or have a different experience. We just don't know any different. So, yes, this place feels like a prison planet, because we are perpetuating that through our dysfunction. And one of the things that I've started seeing too is that, we will often say, well, I want to change, I want to grow, I need to find my tribe, I need to find my community. But what I see that starts to happen is that because we are dysregulated in our nervous systems, and again, we tend to gravitate, right? We attract people who are like us. So we have to be careful and see, where are we connecting through our trauma and our dysregulation, right? And where are we validating each other's trauma? And this, it happens unknowingly. And it's not like we're purposely trying to stay stuck. But we have to be very careful that when we say, well, I resonate with this or I resonate with that, I feel like I can talk to you about anything. Is it because that person shares that same level of traumatic experiences, right? And we can evolve beyond this, but we have to be careful that we're not staying in that muck, right? We're not continuing to dwell in that drama. And really, that's all I ever feel to describe trauma. It's like, if you're engaging in drama, it's trauma. It's these trauma codes that that we all hold, right, in our body system. So we have to be very cautious that what we are perceiving as community, or this gathering, right, of fellowship, that we are perceiving is not really just all of us wallowing in our trauma and validating each other's kind of shitty mindsets or ways of being. And one of the ways that you know that you're not doing that is that when you do hit into the drama, or have an experience of feeling triggered, that as you start to explore that and try to understand what happened, you're not just going back into okay, now I feel better. You are always moving into a deeper understanding of yourself or the other person or the community or the situation, right? Because this is how we know we are dismantling the trauma. So this is where we can have these very kind of tumultuous relationships sometimes, right? We can say, well, this person triggered me, we have this big event, we had an argument, whatever it is, I had to walk away. But was there any reconnection then at a level of non-trauma or non-triggering, right? When we are back in kind of our conscious state, do we have a conversation and do we understand at a deeper level then? Or do we just avoid and let it kind of quiet and fall away and we never talk about it again, right? Or the same kind of situation continuously comes up. That is a clear sign that we are just engaging in trauma, that we are just re-triggering that trauma field, that trauma web, that dysregulation in the nervous system, and we're not evolving beyond it. So again, what I'm starting to see is that we have to be very particular about who and what we are working with, because we always want to move into a higher state within our bodies, but within our minds, our emotional fields, our energetic fields of peace and understanding, right, in that stillness. So one of the things that I had seen occurring this weekend, we know we live in a matrix system, right? But again, the matrix system, I would argue, is really this perpetuating of the trauma, the dysregulation, the distortion. And we can label it in so many different ways and understand it through so many different, let's say, metaphors and analogies. But it all comes down to the same thing, which is that we essentially feel controlled by that, right? That no matter what I do, I always have the same outcome, which is that I don't feel better, or my life is not progressing, and things are not getting better, right? Again, we can look at it on the scale, right, of the microcosm and the macrocosm. The micro being our own kind of personal experience in our body in relation to others, ourselves in relation to greater communities, in relation to the planet, right? In this planetary matrix that exists, which is basically an inversion of everything that is supposed to be when we are in alignment with Source and connected and sourcing from a clear source. And that what I've seen, and I've seen this repeatedly for many, many years, that things are upside down. And it's always looked like a tree, planted in the ground. Like the leaves are in the earth and the roots are here. And what that feels like in the energy field in our bodies is like we have these roots in our minds, right? Which actually has started to look a lot like a crown of thorns, and very barren, dry, brittle, and deserted energy, right? But this is what this experience in the matrix is like. We continually feel abandoned, deserted, isolated, even when we are connecting with others, right? Because engaging in the dysfunction and the trauma makes us feel very alone, even though we may be arguing face to face with someone, right? What's happening is that we are getting farther and farther away from them. And this is really the goal of the matrix system, right? Is to continue to cause us to feel separate, not only from each other, but from our own selves, right? And this is where we say, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? That I don't feel connected, that I don't know who I am, that I don't know what I'm doing here. I think there are these ideas that we come here, we're trying to figure out who we are. This is the goal of life, is to find ourselves. And I don't think that's actually really true at all. I think the reason we don't know who we are is because we're so disconnected from ourselves to begin with, right? But that's, again, the goal of this matrix system that is here. And that unless we start to look at ourselves and our own trauma and the way this trauma plays out, so that we can start to unravel and unwind it and make sense of it, we continue to feed into the matrix. One of the things that I realized with my family was that I cannot, and not just my family, right? Again, there are these different scales that we can look at. So when I look at some of the relationships with my family members, what I realized was that, I cannot engage with this trauma any longer because it actually feeds it, right? It gives life to it. And what I have had to do is really step back and understand, okay, I can make sense of it in different ways, right? But for me and my family right now, it's looking at, okay, there's a lot of kind of undiagnosed things going on, right? There's mental illness, there's dysregulation on different levels. And that is the cause of why this person is acting this way, why I'm responding this way, right? It takes one look, one tone of voice to hit me, to trigger me back into that state of being, right? Which is trauma and drama and family of origin dysfunction. And so I really had to pull back until I could understand that I needed to come from a different place, which is that I have to stop feeling like I'm being invalidated. I have to stop feeling like I'm being targeted and attacked. I have to stop feeling like someone is out to get me, or that somebody doesn't love me, or that someone has abandoned me. And those are all voices of a traumatized being, and a being then that is interacting with the trauma, right? So it's not an easy process either. Sometimes we go in and it takes multiple times of failing at this before we have to say, okay, this isn't working. To go, and this is where we need to start to understand too the difference between the energy and the physical, right? Because to go into the physical and address the person in front of us, let's say, that is frustrated, emotional, acting out, to engage with that is trying to resolve it at a very physical, let's say 3D level. And it's just not possible. When we know that, our nervous system then starts to attune to that, right? Our energy field starts to take on that. So we have to step back and see the underlying energetics of what's going on and address it there first. See it in the other person, but then understand where it hits us, where we hold that wound, let's say, that dysregulation over there is able to affect us here. Because we have this story together, we have this match, we have these codes that sync up through that trauma. And knowing that, this ego, right, that is like, well, I want to fix the world, I want to fix humanity, I'm here to change people, and that's not it at all. The goal, and not even the goal, but the way that it works, the only way it works, is to understand how dysregulated we are, first of all, in our energy, but addressing it. So this is where it gets really complex, right? Because just addressing it through the energy and saying, okay, let me take in the energy, let me have these clearings or attunements or whatever it might be, that is important, but you have to understand how it's playing out specifically through you in your own biology, right? Which means you have to understand your wounds from childhood. You have to understand how those continue to get reinforced then through the people that you continue to connect with, because your nervous system has a specific program and you attract people who will reinforce that program. This is how energy works, right? But understanding the biology is part of the energy field as well. It's not separate, right? So which is a funny thing, because we keep saying, well, we want to merge, we want to integrate, we want our human to become our light body. But do we understand how that actually works, right? Which is that our light body and our biology are intimately connected and a part of each other. And where we continue to feel traumatized and victimized, where we play the role of the martyr, these are very clear signs that we are still allowing that program and that code of dysfunction and trauma to be our dominant expression and experience. So it's complex, but it's also very simple, right? And it's once we start to understand how this works in our own bodies, how we are perpetuating our own wounding in that way, only then can we really see how to start to back away and unravel this. And again, yes, there is so much light coming in, and it's helping to achieve, again, this, like I said, when we're born, right, we have this bioavailability of this clarity of the light of who we are, but it gets dampened and constricted the longer we're on this planet, right? If we're not cognizant of that from the beginning, and most of us are not. So now we have this resurgence of the light. This is why we kind of can call it a rebirth, because there is this availability of light, this, let's say this proportion within ourselves is shifting, right? So that much as when we first come into this planet, we can reconnect to the newness of that availability of that light now within ourselves. But because, as let's say adults now, we've had so many years of experience on this planet, it's been the trauma, it's been the wounding. We have to understand this and reintegrate back to the light. But it means taking responsibility for what is going on now, right? Which most often we are in these mental stages, these mental ranges, where we believe these things to be true about ourselves, about the people around us, about our world, which is very traumatized. So it's not just about taking in more light and connecting to it. It's not just about understanding our wounding. It's both, and then merging this together, integrating all of it. But again, what I've seen happening this weekend is there has been like this flip, right? Where this tree that's been planted upside down, this inversion, having our heads, let's say, stuck and trapped in the matrix now, that is really starting to dissolve. And there are these energies that are really, we are just, for the first time, we can say becoming alive, right? With that organic light, that organic energy, where most of what we have been experiencing and living through is this kind of dead, anti-life, inorganic experience. And we know this, and yet we're like, but I'm living and breathing. So how can this be? That I've been dead, that I've been asleep, that I've been not life. Right? It's kind of, it doesn't all fit together in our psyche. And yet it's really been the truth of it. So, when we talk about, sacred union too, this is sacred union within ourselves, right? Understanding this so that as we release from more and more of the wounded story, more and more of the trauma story that we have held, that we have lived, and that we have then created based on, we start to dissolve that. We can start to hear ourselves more clearly. We can start to feel more clearly and experience more clearly what is the light of our real truth within ourselves, but then in relationship to others, right? And so this relationship to others is vital, though, because this is how we start to build a different resonant frequency, right? This is how we change the frequency that we are all living within, right? Right now, it's this kind of very negative transmission, this negative energy that continues to perpetuate because we continue to engage in our trauma. So we, in doing that, amplify this distorted signal, this distorted range, right? So it really is up to us to know this, to start to take responsibility for this transmission that we are interacting with, that we are speaking with, that we are perpetuating, so that we can start to shift what we ourselves are emanating to create this different experience in reality. And it's not just through, okay, let's get together and let's meditate and let's free the world. Those things are all good, but those are temporary shifts, because if your body itself is not shifting and attuning to that at a biological level, right, you're going back and you're continuing to emit the trauma signal, the wounded signal, right, that matrix transmission. So it's vital that we all shift this within ourselves, right? So that when we do connect with others, it's from a deeper place. It's from a broader range of energy that we can then work with to create, a holy matrix, let's say. I mean, we don't like that word matrix because it conjures up images of, these frequency energies that are basically prisons or fencing, which is what this all is within the mind, this crown of thorns. It's kind of barbed wire. I've seen it in a variety of different ways. It can look like this filigree ironwork, right? But it's all kind of mangled and twisted. through the fields. And we are transmitters. We are essentially towers, for all of these transmissions to run through. And it's being projected into this planetary Earth that we are a part of, right? All of these, let's say, dead frequencies, anti-life frequencies. But where are we being a tower for that, right? Where we are getting triggered and then interacting with others in our triggering, right? That is perpetuating this dead signal, essentially. So, over the weekend, again, what I'm seeing is that, there's a lot of energy coming in to start to dissolve and kind of almost eat away, right, at this dead energy within us, but again, within the planetary body as well. But, we can continue to perpetuate that other field, that other anti-life matrix, if we continue to stay in our dysregulation, right, of these nervous systems and that interaction with others. So it is definitely within our capacity, and there's so much availability here now with the light to move into a different way of being. But it doesn't happen in our sleep where we wake up and we're like, oh my goodness, now I know what to do, right? We have to learn how to work with this. And it's very deliberate, and it has to be conscious, because we know we can get triggered out of nowhere, right? Like somebody says something, or, we're in traffic and somebody cuts us off or whatever. It's like, right? Those are where sometimes we're shocked. Like, I can't believe I got so upset. I cannot believe that I had that reaction. Like, what the heck happened, right? So at very deep levels, we are having to see these things within ourselves, because where we are unconscious, or we are in our subconscious, where we don't know where this is occurring, this is where we're going to get hit, because this is what happens when so much light comes in, right? It comes in everywhere. It floods the fields to bring these things up. So the work is continuous in this way. We will constantly be shown where we are still holding this dysregulation in ourselves. So it feels like it never ends, and that's partly true, but at the same time, we gain more and more clarity and more grace through this, right? Every time we kind of find a piece of the puzzle for ourselves, we gain also a greater sense of wisdom and trust, and then self-confidence, right, in our ability to ways, and to really, again, not just to interact with the light, right, but to dismantle the distortion and the trauma program that we've been carrying. So this is the work, and this is the experience right now. It can be very scary at times, but the light always resurfaces. And this is what I always have to remind myself too, that, sometimes I go into places where it feels like I'm very stuck, it's very dark, and I forget, that, yeah, the light always comes to the surface again. I will always return to the truth of who I am. And in the meantime, it can be very, isolating, and scary. But, we always come through these stages. And again, a sign that you are kind of on the right path is that you emerge with deeper wisdom and deeper understanding, deeper compassion, a deeper vision to understand not only yourself, but those around you as well. So we always want to be looking for this, within our own fields, but then also in our relationships, in the ways in which we are engaging with others. And if we're not having that experience, we need to really take a look at ourselves. What are we still hiding from? What are we afraid of uncovering within ourselves? Or where are we engaging with others through our trauma, right? Where is this a trauma bond? Where we need to really kind of step back and be honest with ourselves. So, okay, I hope that was helpful. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Take good care.